Around 1905, Lottie Quillated, daughter of the Laguna Pueblo chief, appears wearing Kawaii attire, with a belt and bead necklaces. The scene in the semi-arid west-central region of New Mexico reflects the territorial phase and the interest of ethnographers in documenting Pueblo lifeways near Albuquerque. Dated 1908 and attributed to Roland Reed, the scene features an Ojibwe woman. At the turn of the 20th century, ethnographic photography popularized idealized images of indigenous peoples. Dress, adornments, and posture indicate female roles amid colonial expansion and a declining fur trade. Photographed by Carl Wernz in 1900 in Hopi Territory, Arizona, the scene shows two girls by an adobe window. At the dawn of the 20th century, with railroads and federal agents expanding contact, the outward gaze suggests a childhood between the ancestral home and a changing world. In 1878, at Fort Keogh, Montana Territory, a Cheyenne woman is documented. The fort, erected after Little Bighorn, marked U.S. military expansion and the reservation system. In the same period occurred the Northern Cheyenne Exodus, 1878-79, an attempt to return to ancestral lands. Image of Carlotta Chiwiwi and her daughters, Maria and Felicita Tura, connected to the Isleta Pueblo community. Attributed to Poli, early 20th century New Mexico on the eve of statehood in 1912. The photographic production of the period shaped how the Pueblo peoples were presented to the public. Photograph of Hopi girls in Sikomovi, on First Mesa, Arizona. Produced by Frederick Monson in the early 20th century, it aligns with the period's ethnographic practices. Girls with traditional clothing, hairstyles, and adornments that indicate clan ties and ceremonial life. Young woman of the Taos Pueblo people, in present-day New Mexico in 1895. In the background, the centuries-old settlement of adobe houses, predating Spanish colonization. The community spanned Spanish, Mexican, and American rule, maintaining everyday practices and identities. In the image in 1892, a young Kiowa woman is photographed in a U.S. reservation context. The scene suggests everyday tasks and possible village rites. Clothing, adornments, and posture indicate family position and gender roles that structured Kiowa social life at the end of the 19th century. In the image, a woman of the Spokane people, photographed in 1897 by Frank LaRoche. It belongs to the period of reservation consolidation after the Dawes Act, 1887, and highlights Spokane dress and social presence on the Columbia Plateau in the Pacific Northwest, within the context of regional indigenous history. In 1904, the Pueblo people's corn maiden in present-day New Mexico symbolizes the grain that has been an agricultural and dietary staple since ancestral times. The figure is part of rain and harvest rituals, signaling ceremonial continuity after centuries of colonization. In 1900, Carl Everton Moon began a systematic project on Native peoples in the U.S. He worked in the context of reservations, the arrival of railroads, and compulsory schools, as westward expansion intensified. He sought to document rites, attire, and landscapes. Woman of the Taos Pueblo people, photographed in the 1880s in present-day New Mexico. The image, typical of ethnographic surveys tied to U.S. state expansion, allows observation of features, clothing, adornments, and indications of position in the community. In the 1880s, Marcia Pascal, of Cherokee descent and daughter of George Pascal, an officer in the U.S. Army, appears in a post-Reconstruction country. The expansion of railroads, urbanization, and new federal regulations reorganized territories and civic life. In 1894, a Kiowa woman is captured amid post-Indian Wars tensions in Indian Territory, present-day Oklahoma. U.S. expansion, confinement to reservations, and land loss affected customs, gender roles, and rituals, putting cultural continuity at risk. In 1900, a young indigenous woman wears ceremonial dress. At the turn of the 20th century, in the wake of broken treaties and allotment laws, Native communities faced loss of territories and languages. The attire affirms cultural continuity in the face of state pressure. In 1899, Frank Reinhardt photographed Hattie Tom, a woman of the Apache people. On the threshold of the 20th century during the Reservation era and U.S. expansion, such images circulated at urban fairs. The studio scene reveals dress and posture before the public gaze. Elsie Vance Chestuan fits into the history of the Chiricahua, an Apache subgroup. In the 19th century, U.S. expansion led to military campaigns, broken treaties, and forced removals, from Arizona to prisons and reservations, under state control that redefined names, territories, and identities. In 1886, Lizzie Longwolf performs in Buffalo Bill's Wild West. These traveling shows, aimed at urban audiences, staged an idealized frontier and included indigenous people in choreographed numbers. Her presence reveals how the spectacle shaped popular views of Native peoples and their roles. A photograph from 1895 shows a young Hopi woman on the mesas of Arizona in the late 19th century in the U.S. Southwest. Garments and ornaments indicate local knowledge and materials. The framing highlights features and posture, allowing one to read codes of identity and agency amid the colonial order. In 1899, Frank Reinhardt photographed Hattie Tom, of the Chiricahua Apache people, in a studio in the post-Indian War's United States. Clothing and adornments reveal practices and identities maintained despite life on reservations. The image is part of ethnographic series from the late 19th century. In 1886, Isabel Perico Njadi, a Chiricahua Apache and prisoner of war, is shown under military custody after the final campaigns and Geronimo's surrender. The scene bears witness to captures, forced displacements, and army control in the U.S. Southwest. Around 1900, Alice appears possibly linked to the Cayuse, Walla Walla, or Umatilla peoples of the Columbia Plateau in the area of present-day Oregon and Washington. In reservation times, features, dress, adornments, and setting indicate ties and cultural practices. An 1885 image shows a young Comanche, years after the Red River War, 1874-75, and the settling onto reservations in Indian Territory, present-day Oklahoma. Hairstyles and dress combine trade items and beads, signaling adaptation to the demands of American expansion. A 1900 image shows a young Hopi woman on her wedding day, on the plateaus of Arizona. The rite, conducted by clans, consolidated alliances and community order. The dark mantle, the belt, and the adornments highlight the village's textile work. At the turn of the century, the ceremony reaffirms cultural continuity. In 1886, Julie Nelson appears in late Victorian fashion, a high-collared dress and restrained posture. Studio photography, subject to long exposures, demands stillness. The fixed gaze and respectful pose obey class and gender codes typical of the urban morals of the period. Umi and Carrie, Kiowa, by George A. Addison, 1895, shows two figures on Kiowa Island, South Carolina, at the end of the 19th century. Amid the transformations of the post-Civil War era, realism organizes volumes and space, observing people and the shoreline of the Sea Islands. 1880s on the Great Plains. Young Comanches gain centrality as the nation is confined to reservations, and the bison grow scarce, shaking the economy. They sustain life, prepare food, tan hides, make clothing and beads, manage herds and trade, educate children and pass on songs, preserving rituals and alliances under colonial pressure.